The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept it, and hold it. May we realize the true mind, the Tathagata. Today is day 3 of this 7-day sesshin, the first of 2 in a row in March 2023. In a week after the end of this sesshin, of course, we will begin the next sesshin. An incredible opportunity to really double down on your practice and reap much greater benefits than you would if you went to 2 sesshin further apart. It is quite magic. So I'd like to share with you a few things today. One is Japan as a country, as a culture, has an investment in making things easy for people. Not so much easy as not creating trouble for people, not creating disappointment, unhappiness, inconvenience, and so on. And so everything is quite regular. It's kind of amazing and a very big change from what we have in the United States, at least in terms of transportation. Everything links in. You go down the street to the corner and you can catch any number of different buses. When it's rush hour, they often come in pairs of the same line, so that even if the first bus is full, there's going to be room on the second bus, and they're both going to the same place, which ultimately is the downtown bus terminal, and stopping at different places along the way. They have various different routes. You can just go online and find the routes, and they're quite convenient. They come frequently, so that you walk down the street to the corner of the tomato bank from Sogenji, and you can hop on a bus and go into town, and from there you can catch a different bus. Or since the bus station is almost across the street from the train station, you can get on a train. There's a shopping mall right there as well. And in the shopping mall, there's a ticket area for bus, a different kind of bus, a bus that goes to the airport. You can take a train to the airport, and all along the way, various different stops at very different places. There are very different levels of trains. The Shinkansen, the famous bullet train, will zoom along so fast that, and with utter quiet and no clunkiness. And then there are the more local trains, but still there are faster ones and there are slower ones. And the faster ones will bypass certain stations. And so you have to know which one you're getting on if you want to get to a particular station that might be bypassed. And then, of course, there are the very local ones that stop everywhere along the route. So it's incredibly convenient. There's also a bus, and not a bus, a boat that you can get from Okayama to, which is basically very close to the sea, the inland sea. You can get a boat to the airport in Osaka, and again, from the airport, you can go many different places with all kinds of convenience. So it's very easy to travel in Japan, at least if you know where you're going and how to read some of the signs. And these days, of course, most of the signs flip back and forth between kanji, the Chinese characters that are the main part of the written language in Japan, and romaji, which is Roman characters. Ji means character. So you're seeing it spelled out as it sounds, so you can tell where you're going because the sounds are the same. And in addition, on the Shinkansen in particular, but also on the other trains, the stations are announced ahead of time. And in fact, the Shinkansen, not only is the station announced, but what side of the train you're going to get off on to get onto the platform in that particular place. Because sometimes the platform's on the right, sometimes it's on the left. In addition, when you're at the train station, everybody queues up. There are often lines painted on the platform, and people obediently line up within those lines to go onto a train. It's really quite amazing. Very dependable. And that brings me to a different topic, but related. In India, nothing runs on time. Nothing meets any schedule. When we were in India, Zvisan and I, heading to the conference of women ordained Buddhist priests in Bodh Gaya, which is a 24-hour train ride from Delhi. We arrived in Delhi. We were supposed to have been met at the airport. We weren't. We eventually got to where we were supposed to be staying, and then it turns out we couldn't stay there because a whole coterie of Tibetan monks had arrived at that place, and so, being females, we couldn't stay in the same place. So we ended up with a guest house, and then we were originally supposed to, according to all the faxes back and forth from Japan, to have a train ticket available, a reservation ready for us when we got there, so that the next morning we would head on to the train and to Bodh Gaya. None of that worked. And not only had the train reservation not been made, but no train reservation was available for that day or the next day. So we had to spend 2 more days in the guest house, which kind of strained our finances. And then we finally had a ticket on a particular train, which was to start in the morning. And we went 2 hours ahead of time to the train station, because you can never be sure in India of anything. And we waited and we waited, and it was initially up on the announcement board, and then it disappeared. So then we went and asked the person who was the ticket master, was behind a very thick glass wall, and so we've discovered that the train was not going to leave that morning. It was going to leave at 6 o'clock that night. So we went back to the guest house, and then we came back again 2 hours ahead of time and waited and waited. And it was supposed to be on a particular track. We waited and we waited and we waited, and pretty soon it came to the time the train was supposed to be there, and there was no train. So we went back and asked again. Oh, it was going to be on a very different track, and it was going to leave at 8. So we went to the very different track, and then it was chaos trying to get onto the train. Everybody was scrambling, pushing each other back and forth in a mad rush to elbow their way onto the train, even though there was a conductor standing at the door of the train and checking off who was supposed to be on that particular car, and if your name was on the car, theoretically you were allowed to get on the car. If it wasn't, you weren't supposed to. But many people elbowed their way in, and in fact, when Zvisan and I got into our car finally, and we were supposed to get on particular bunks, we found 2 other people just sitting on the bunk. These were people who were not even supposed to be in the car. Then we took off finally, and it was overnight. The car was full of traveling Indian men, which wasn't a particular problem, except the whole night long it was a symphony of snores. And comes dawn, and we begin to think, okay, now where are we and when are we going to get off? Because there were no announcements, and the train windows were so filthy you couldn't tell where you were, what station name there was, if there was a name on the station. And often the train just zoomed right through the station or slowed down so people could hop off. And thankfully, Zvisan's German father, being very precise, had sent us some very detailed maps of India. And when we crossed a very broad river that we recognized was the Ganges, we realized that it was coming up soon, this stop. And when we felt like it was imminent, we asked another passenger on the train, where is the next stop Gaia? And he followed us out onto the back platform so that we could, in case we had to just simply hop off with our suitcases, we were in our robes too. And he let us know which stop we were at was Gaia. And as he turned around and left, he said, "Are you Buddhist?" And we said, "Yes." And he said, "My name is Siddhartha." So anyway, we hopped off, and then ensued a fight between a group of cycle, whatever you call them, motorcycle taxis, basically. It's a motorcycle with a couple of seats on the back. And one person, it turns out, had jumped the line, and everybody else got quite angry. So they argued among themselves, and then we finally figured out who was the person next in line we should have found to go to Bodh Gaya. And of course, we arrived several days late for the conference, but so did everybody else, because it was India. That actually turned out to be quite fortunate, because the night before we arrived, 2 foreigners were murdered in Bodh Gaya, which is a very, very small town. So I have a dear friend. Some of you know him. He is a Dharma successor of Mel Weitzman of San Francisco Zen Center, but he's also trained in other places, including at Tohomo Monastery, which is where I got to know him better. And he's, of course, been at the Zen Teachers Association meetings as well. His name is Hozan Alan Sanaki. And I suspect that his Buddhist name, Hozan, means Dharma Mountain. And he also goes to India. He has a mission to help relieve suffering. And he acts on it very, very seriously. He was originally one of the founders of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship and ran it for many, many, many years, about 20 years, I think, maybe, and finally retired from that and started another project called, is it Clear something or other? I don't remember what the exact name is. And through that, he has raised funds to go to India. The Dalit caste, known as untouchables, excuse me, in India, are sort of the bottom of the pecking order. And one of their members somehow, quite a long time ago, managed to get to university and through law school. His last name was Ambedkar, and end up in, I think, Congress or something. At any rate, he was very, very much against, understandably, the caste system in India, and had lobbied unsuccessfully to have it changed. And finally, he decided, after investigating the religions that were prominent in India at the time, that the most logical one for him to be part of, the most accepting one for him to be part of, was Buddhism. Buddhism, as you know, had originally started in India and had kind of faded out. In fact, I'm not quite sure. I think you must have read about it, because I'm not sure that there was any Buddhism being practiced in India at the time. And when he changed religion, somehow an enormous number of other Dalit people did so and became Buddhist. And so there was a very small Buddhist movement. Most of them became Buddhist in name, but here and there were some that were trying to actually practice. And so he somehow he has developed a group that sincerely practices. And he goes every year, at least once, to work with them and encourage them and help raise funding for them. He also has been working since the pogrom in Burma against the Rohingya to help those people as well. They're Muslims. That doesn't matter. They're people in pain. They're people suffering. And so he goes where suffering is. But I give you this background because I want to bring up something else, which is very, very common in Zen practice. I have to tell my watch that I'm actually not walking anymore, since it hasn't figured that one out yet. So I'd like to share with you a piece from a book he's just written, actually. It just became public on Amazon.com. And here's a portion of it. At least I tried to get a portion of it. Okay, here we are. Alan is riding in a cab from the Calcutta airport to his hotel, but the driver, with whom Alan has no common language, can't find the address. This is so common for India. After a good deal of zigzagging about in the darkness, he stops his cab in the middle of a street. Wordless, ushers Alan out, puts his baggage into a rickshaw that happens to be there, and drives away. Alan climbs aboard, and the rickshaw man pulls him through the Calcutta night to his hotel. No words are spoken in this episode, but the teaching seems to be that when you're anxious because of being in an unfamiliar situation, then if you see that you're not in evident danger, you have the chance to go into not knowing. As we get deeper in our practice, we reach a place of a sense of danger, actually. In fact, some people don't even get there because they hold themselves back from it so far they don't even recognize it. There's almost like a smell of it, but that's too much already. However, if we are to truly become free, and we can become free in ways we cannot even fathom, the depth of that freedom is phenomenal, then it's important to walk into that insecurity, that not knowing, even as frightening, as anxiety producing it will seem to us. This is why a commitment to practice is so vital, because without it, and without the faith that we can actually get there to the other side of this swamp that we're slogging through, it's called practice, at least initially, then unless we have that faith, we'll stop short. And many people have stopped short. When I was at the Rochester Zen Center long ago, people would come to workshops. You would see 50, 60, 100 people, and of them, very, very, very few, a handful, would come back and start sitting there. Well, that's fine. There are many paths for people, and we certainly don't try to get people to do Zen practice. It's not. It doesn't work. People have to want to do the practice, be committed to do the practice, and then they'll be willing, up to a point at least, to slog through what they have to slog through in the beginning. And what we have to slog through is our own stuff. That's the only thing blocking us. We are conditioned from birth, and the conditioning results in a self-image. We think we're this. We think we're whatever our conditioning has produced. But that's not who we are. That may be the overt persona that we've developed in order to somehow survive in a world that, for people who've been traumatized, is a very insecure world. But who we really are is so much more than that. And if we do our Zen practice deeply enough for long enough, we will awaken to that amazingness that we really are. But along the way, there's a lot of stuff that we have to open to, that we have an investment in not opening to. That doesn't mean, if we're traumatized, that we need to remember the trauma necessarily. Oftentimes, the trauma is not remembered overtly. There's something called explicit memory and something called implicit memory. And we don't necessarily have an explicit memory of a situation. In other words, we don't remember exactly what happened, but our body knows. And it's locked in our body. And so when any other situation comes up that is anxiety producing, it will stop us in our tracks, or unless we can really, really, really gently work with it. This persona that we have is invested in controlling, very invested in controlling, because that's the only way we feel secure. Human beings are, in essence, genetically programmed, as felt, to be part of a group. And in order to be part of a group, zebras all have stripes. Giraffes all have long necks. We're all constrained, if we want to be part of that group, to behaving in a certain way. It can get extreme. I remember the 1950s, where if you were working in an office, and you were only a man that was working in the office, unless it was a secretary who was paid very little, your outfit was a dark suit with a white shirt, no colored shirts, a white shirt, and a conventional conservative tie. That was it. If you didn't go in like that, and you were also clean shaven as well. No beards. Your hair was cropped short. It was the uniform. And if you strayed from that, there was a problem. You might lose your job. And in fact, I know a man, in fact, he actually taught us how to build adobe walls here at the Zendo. Lawrence Tharp was a Foreign Service officer back in the 1960s. And he, when we knew him, he looked like a wild man. Unkempt hair, fairly long, an unkempt beard. And that's how he wanted to be, which is fine. He was very kind and generous and thoughtful. He was a professor at United World College when we knew him. And but before that, he was in the Foreign Service, which is a fairly conservative outfit. It's the State Department for the United States. These are diplomats, and there's a certain limited view of how you should behave and what you should look like. And in fact, in the particular group my husband was in when we went to Burma, and well, before we went to Burma, there's something called the A100 course, where incoming Foreign Service officers get 3 months of training in a lot of things, including culture shock and various other things like that. And in that group, there was a couple that was, at any rate, their religion prevented them from drinking alcohol. Well, alcohol is ubiquitous in the Foreign Service. And in fact, it's known, alcoholism, cirrhosis of the liver, is known as an illness that is connected to the Foreign Service. So these folks had to get official permission not to offer liquor in the Foreign Service. Now, Foreign Service is about um, both expressing American culture and about, if you're a political officer or an economic officer, getting to know everybody you can in order to find out more and more about the country and about other countries who have representatives in that country. It's kind of a mild sort of spying. And so there are many, many parties normally. And in fact, when we were stationed in Yangon, we would go to 3 parties every night of the week. It was extreme. And the liquor flowed. I actually watched more than one person literally slide under the table solidly drunk. So if you don't fit in, you're out. And if you're out, it's dangerous. So we are people of natural control. We want to be in, so we behave in ways that keep us in. There's certain latitudes, but they're limited. And we develop a level of anxiety under the cover, particularly if we've had any untoward experiences growing up, that makes it imperative for us to really be in control of our environment. Now, Zen practice will begin to erode that control, necessarily so, because Zen practice, in order to come to awakening, you have to let go everything. It is a very frightening proposition for many people. It certainly was for me. I remember being terrified of going into Dokusan in case I made the wrong move. I was normally, in the beginning at least, quite silent. And I was praying that Roshi would not assign me a koan, because then there was the opportunity to really muck it up in public, in front of him. And there was always a sense that he could see right through me, so that was particularly anxiety-producing. And as a result, I went through a lot of my earlier sesshin just shut down because it was too frightening to be present. Of course, in order to come to awakening, we have to be present, or at least become present long enough for ourselves to be able to see what is beyond this level of control we feel we need. And even if people don't feel like they need control, just put yourself into a situation where it's uncertain and see how you feel. Is there a niggling sense of anxiety or a numbness which would cover up that anxiety? Doubt, determination, and faith are the 3 pillars of Zen practice. Doubt is not doubting other than perhaps a sense that maybe our ordinary world as we view it is not all that there is. Stephen Batchelor wrote a book about doubt, and in it he called it perplexity, which is perhaps a better description of it. Determination. If we're not willing to keep on regardless of challenge, and of course it's going to be an up and down trajectory. Sometimes we'll be able to move forward with ease, other times we will feel blocked, in which case the most optimal thing to do at that point is to tune into our body, because that blockedness is in our body. And if we tune into the energy there, even if it is a sense of numbness, it will ease. And what is really going on, anxiety, fear, is going to be revealed. That said, whatever we are trying to hold ourselves away from feeling is not anywhere near as frightening, daunting, challenging as just going in and feeling the darn feeling. You don't have to like it. You're not required to like it.
And also the brain is normally, or a psyche, maybe that's a better word since we don't know for sure it's the brain that's doing this. Our psyche generally protects us from opening to too much too soon. And so to have faith in that and just keep working, offering radical acceptance to whatever uncomfortable feeling begins to surge through your body. And it may not surge, it may just be a kind of a very mild form of it. Radical acceptance is an openness to feeling, accepting that, okay, this is what the energy is at the moment. I don't have to like it, but this is what's going on in my body at this time. That's what Jacques Lutheran did in Buchenwald. Tuned in fully, even though what was going on in his body was exceedingly painful. He tuned in and ultimately had an amazing awakening experience that stayed with him. That's this proof that it was very deep, that it was still alive for him in his 50s, and this happened when he was like 20 years old. So 30 years later, it was still alive. The same with Flora Courtois. 20 years later, it was so clear that that original awakening was deep enough and functioning well in her life that Mitra-roshi didn't feel the need to test her. So as we get closer to a bigger letting go, or even any letting go, which is an essential part of Zen training, anxiety can come up. And we just tune into that, feel it. Most of you have heard the story of a period of time, and this was fairly late in my practice actually, where I had anxiety, a pretty serious anxiety come up. My childhood was not exactly a piece of cake. And so I had this metaphor that I was imagining, having spent that childhood in Canada, where we went ice skating every evening after school in the winter, which is a very long time. And so I had this sense of skating across a frozen lake that was only semi-frozen. It was in the spring, and so it was beginning to thaw. When we were living in Canada, we used to go to an island, St. Mary's, in the St. Mary's River, and visit friends there. You had to take a boat to get there, but in the winter, the ice was so thick that cars could drive across. However, in the spring, it was a little dangerous. And there was a very long hill that led down to the edge of the water where the ferry boat would be. It was a car ferry, but took one car at a time. And rumor was that in a previous year, a sledge is what they call them. It's not exactly a sled. It's a very heavy sledge that was pulled by a team of 4 horses. And this is how our milk was delivered in the wintertime. It was only 2 horses, because I guess it was a lighter weight sledge. The sledge went down the hill. The horses went in front of it, of course, and I guess they couldn't stop the sledge. It was originally going to go across the river on the ice, but it broke through. So there's that kind of danger, even though the ice would have been ordinarily previously, in previous months or days, it would have been something close to a foot or 2 feet deep. So I'm skating across this semi-frozen lake, and my skate goes out just a little bit, and there's a crack. So the anxiety comes up. I sit with it, I feel it, and then I put the other foot out, crack, and so on. And this went on for 1.5 years. And one day I found myself all the way across the lake. The anxiety completely used up, if you want to call it that. Certainly it was gone. At least the bite of it was gone. The anxiety was still there, but it was more like, okay, oh yeah, sure, come on along for the ride. It's fine. Very different. We can work with these things. And if we're doing Zen practice and we intend to go deep and become fully awakened or even a little bit awakened, we will come up against that. At a session in Mexico, my good friend Terry Lerdo, who was a therapist actually, had a Kensho experience. And she told me afterwards, I honestly felt I was literally dying. Well, we're going to die someday. I don't know anybody who has managed to avoid that over the millennia that humans have inherited the earth. So how's it going to be? As the poem to one of the koans in the Momokon says, when the light of your eyes is falling, will you be like the crab with its 7 arms and 8 legs struggling to get out of the boiling water? Or will you, as so many people have done, simply not breathe in again with ease, moving on? Life is eternal. There's no beginning and no end. You cannot fall out of the universe, but it can certainly feel like you're going to. So be brave. Recognize that this is something that can come up for people. Recognize that if you really want to become awakened, if you really want to become free, you'll have to work with it. And the way to work with it is to tune in to what's going on in your body. Be brave. It's worth it. And it doesn't last forever. As you process any anxiety, any fear, any residue of trauma, eventually, through this amazing way of processing, it will be processed, and it won't, you may have some memory of it, but it won't have any bite to it. And then your practice will go even deeper. This is an essential part of practice. Most people, pretty much everybody really, comes to Zen practice through some level of discomfort. For some people, it's seriously traumatic. For others, it's a low-lying anxiety that developed when we were small children. But pretty much everyone has it. It's well known in the psychotherapy field that people who have had difficult life experiences turn to spirituality because nothing else has made a difference. So I thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.